So, you have finally decided to take on the role of a dungeon master. You poor bastard. Okay, so here's the deal, right? You have decided you are going to become a dungeon master. You decided that you are going to sit down and write a campaign. You're going to run a game for your friends, and you're going to sit in that big old chair with your big old screen, and you are going to roll some dice and tell a story with your buddies. But how do you write a campaign? Well, today I have the solution for you. I've got some tips for you here on how to write a good homebrew campaign. Let's get into it.
Riser, double.
I take how much damage? Step 1 to running a homebrew campaign is to run a pre-mod. Yeah, it is 110% your best bet to run a pre-module. If you're not aware what a pre-module is, it is something like this. This is the special edition of Curse of Strahd. Basically, it is a pre-written campaign from the authors of Wizards of the Coast, and then sometimes you can find pre-written campaigns that were homebrewed by other people. A lot of times you might go on something like D&D Beyond, or even a big place to check is really any Dungeons and Dragons YouTuber that's like massive, like XP to level 3, Pointy Hat, Jenny D, the Dungeon Dudes, etc., etc. Any of those massive D&D YouTubers will probably at some point showcase a Kickstarter that is their own, not homebrew, but their own fan-made pre-built campaign. Basically, you want to find something that's written before you write your own, and the reason for that is because it will teach you very, very good habits. I have spent the past 9 years, roughly, learning how to be a dungeon master, basically from scratch. I played in one game, and I took what my DM did, and I tried to mimic what he did without understanding the nuances of what he did, and I failed again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Tons and tons of my homebrew campaigns fell through for multiple reasons, and a lot of them were because I just didn't know how to write a fucking campaign. I didn't understand how you are supposed to build suspense, because writing a campaign is not the same as writing a story, right? I understand that a lot of people out there fancy themselves as story writers. They're, I'm gonna write this really compelling story, my players are gonna have fun in the world, etc., etc., etc. The problem with all of that is that you're not writing a story per se, you're writing an adventure. You're writing something for people to exist within, not something for people to read along to. If you want to write a story where you control everything, write a fucking book. But if you want to write a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, then you need to leave stuff open for interpretation. Because at the end of the day, if you write the perfect story from front to back, everything falls in line perfectly, your players are not going to do that. And on top of that, a good Dungeons and Dragons campaign is one where the player's input matters. So running a pre-mod will teach you how to take into account player accountability, player initiative, player agency. You will learn how to put things in front of players, but it also teaches good habits like, setting up dialogue and encounters and how to level scale and other things like that. But once you get past that, the first thing you want to do is decide on the amount of sessions and a level cap. I know. You're like, oh, but Kaiser, you don't get it. I got this big world planned, and I went on to World Anvil, and I built, like, from the ground up, all of these locations, and important NPCs, and history, and... Hey, stop. Chill. Relax. Before you do any of that, I want you to remember that there is a set endpoint you're going to get to. What story do you want the players to tell with you? And I highly recommend avoiding homebrew worlds for your first, 7 campaigns. as you're running campaigns, a good thing for being a dungeon master is, as you're running campaigns, you can slowly but surely build a homebrew world in the background. But until you understand how other worlds are built, it's very similar to running a pre-mod. Until you understand how other worlds are built, you are never going to be able to successfully create a homebrew world. So I think it's very important that you understand that you need to slow down and first just kind of understand where you're coming from. So figure out how many sessions you want them to play and what the level cap is. So if you want to write a campaign, this tells you how long the campaign is going to be, right? So if you want a campaign to last, say, 6 months, which is on average 6 times 4, 24 sessions. So you want a campaign to last 6 months, on average is 24 sessions. You think, okay, that's what I need. I want the players to get to level 9 by the time they fight the BBEG. So you keep those two things in mind, and then that helps you structure. I highly recommend you do milestone leveling. I will do an entire video on the difference between milestone leveling and XP leveling, and why after years of doing XP leveling, I transferred to milestone leveling. I'll explain that another day, but I highly recommend that's what you do. Next up, you need to decide what kind of campaign is it going to be. Is it going to be an adventure, a sandbox, a dungeon crawling, or a heavy role-playing campaign? One of the big things that I feel like a lot of people don't understand is that there are 4 major types of campaigns with basically a shitload of overlap. An adventure campaign is the survivors traveling from one point on the map to another. So for example, in my current campaign, my survivors started... Fucking Death by Daylight brain rot, dude, it's gonna fucking kill me. My players started in the bottom of Breland, and they're making their way up to Ondare in the Eberron setting. So basically, my campaign is an adventure campaign. They are traveling from place to place, trying to reach the end goal of the campaign. A sandbox campaign is one that I really don't recommend. I'm going to do a whole video on that one specifically. But sandbox campaign is, you have a setting, you have a vague story, and then you just kind of plop your players in there, and you say, go nuts. And they go nuts. You're basically a sandbox is letting your players build their own story fully, basically outside of your control. There's no real BBEG. There's no real, like, final thing. It's just literally put them in there, give them some settings, some characters, and let them run free with it. It's a very difficult type of campaign to run, and it's one that I don't recommend you do pretty much at all, but it is something that's an option to you if you learn how to do it right. A dungeon crawling campaign is exactly what it sounds like. You basically just keep giving your players dungeons. This is something that some players enjoy. I typically don't. But it's something that some players enjoy. You throw your players into, you're like, okay, we're going to start with a bandit hideout. And then from the bandit hideout, they go sell all the shit they looted. And then it's a cavern that belongs to some monsters or whatever, right? And then eventually you'll start upgrading them. A beholder's lair, a dragon's lair, a leviathan's lair, all the way up until a lich's lair, right? Dungeon crawling campaigns are very combat focused. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't fully grasp as being something that you can do. If your players just want to fight shit all the time, it's a great concept, but it is something you need to keep in mind when writing a campaign, that it's probably not going to have a lot of story to it. But yeah. And then the final one is plot heavy. Plot heavy campaigns are ones that have a shitload of role playing, typically take place in only 1 to 3 locations. There's not a lot of traveling involved. So plot heavy campaigns is your final one. So you want to decide between those 4. And like I said, there's a shitload of overlap between them and a bunch of different subcategories. Maybe I'll make a full-on video one day about all the different types of campaigns there are. But those are the 4 major ones. So decide on that one when you're writing your own homebrew. Finally, you want to decide on the starting location and the story. Once you have everything involved on what you want to go with, you want to decide where your characters are going to be starting out at and where you want them to end at. So for example, the end of my campaign, I'm not going to give you the full answer, but the end of my campaign is going to end in Ondair. That is where they're going to come to face with the BBEG. That is where their campaign is going to end. So I know already from this point where this is going. But one thing that I didn't actually write down in my notes, and one thing I want to give to you guys, because this just happened last session, have a backup. You want to have a backup. I had an important NPC that they were supposed to escort to Ondair, and unfortunately that NPC died in the last campaign. I tried to save the NPC. The dice told me no. And technically, I could be, as the GM, I could be like, actually he's invincible. But then there's no stakes, right? Then there's, why were they escorting a thing that can't die? That's stupid. So I had a backup plan. I had a backup plan to what they would do, how they would know where to go and stuff if this NPC died. The backup plan, I started it last night. And so I really think that a lot of headache can be solved if you just have a few backup plans. But that brings us to the last thing, and that is write max 3 sessions at a time. Do not, listen to me, look at me. Do not write a billion fucking sessions. Do not fucking, I had someone come to me when I first started giving out advice, and they were like, I'm stuck. And I was like, what do you mean? And like, well, I wrote enough material for the next 10 sessions, and then my players just went the opposite direction. I was like, okay. And they were like, well, now I gotta rewrite all that. First off, you don't have to rewrite all that. You just need to move shit. Move important NPCs, move important artifacts, move important cities. But if you can't move stuff, there's a reason you don't write more than 3 in advance. Because then, at the max, you only have to rewrite 2 sessions. Always try to stay 2 sessions ahead. I personally like to stay 3 just because I like to be prepared, and because I have ADHD, so time blindness and the fact that I only ever seem to do work when I'm pressured to do it. But yeah, you want to make sure you stay 3 campaigns ahead. 3 sessions ahead, not campaigns, 3 sessions ahead. That's one of the biggest parts to writing your homebrew. Have your beginning point, your climax, and your end point, but the middle parts, all the middle parts, write it as you go. Make sure that your players are following what's going on, and if they're not, then you need to move shit around, rearrange crap in order to get that going. And that's everything to writing a good homebrew. There was some other stuff I left out that I want to dedicate entire videos to, like how to interject your players' stories into your story. This was just a basic overhaul of it, but I will be doing a separate video on integrating the players' backstories with your own homebrew story in order to make sure that everything fits together nicely. So keep a lookout for that video. It'll probably be the next one. But I hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, I greatly appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next one.